The beginnings of Taos Ski Valley and its early history. We're going to go back in time a ways, but this first slide is my parents standing in front of the old Hondo Lodge. This is in the late 50s. My father came to the United States in 1938. He was Swiss-German, he was a Swiss citizen, and his parents had to leave Germany, and he joined them here in the United States. He first met my mother at the Roundhouse in Stowe, and that would have been Christmas time 1940. And she didn't think much of him at the time because he insisted on wearing one of those old-time parkas that had a big zipper right here and then a huge pocket. And he, because the lifts were much slower in those days, he would put the New York Times in there, read the New York Times going up the lift. But they did get together later on. She had moved to Santa Fe in 1939. I'm sure she did it to escape her mother, but anyway, she was supposed to be studying art and lived in Santa Fe. My father came to visit her there. That would be the spring of 1941. This next photo is my dad, taken during the Second World War. He served in the U.S. Army and had a very interesting career. He was attached to General Patton's headquarters for most of the European campaign after the war. When he got to Santa Fe, it took him a while to get back. That would be in 1949. He went to the Chamber of Commerce to see about jobs, and in the economy of Santa Fe of 1949, there were no jobs. But interestingly, the folks at the Chamber of Commerce heard his accent and they said, "Do you know how to ski?" And he said, "Sure." And they said, "You know what? They're building a ski area here, but they don't have anyone that knows how to ski." So that was the beginning. He was the manager of the Santa Fe Ski Basin about 2 weeks later, and he stayed there as manager through 1954. In 1953 or so, there was a ski area already which had been built by the CCC in downtown Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and my father was managing both. But as he flew basically the straight line north and south from Santa Fe to Glenwood, he would vary his route, and he did notice that the mountains in this photograph seemed to hold snow very, very late into the season. But in those days before snowmaking, that interested him greatly. He had explored many mountains in New Mexico. Basically, he had climbed up with friends usually, but sometimes alone, up into the Truchas and so on. And I think he created quite the scene marching down through the streets of Truchas with his skis, which were in those days basically unknown in Truchas, but they were convinced that the gringos were nuts anyway. Late in the season in 1954, he and Lute, who was the Alaska ski champion of 1939, Pete Totemoff, the Forest Service's only skier, hiked in quite a distance, and they skied on the mine dump because in May of 1954 it still had plenty of snow. Totemoff was also one heck of a skier. Rocks, stumps, forest debris, nothing seemed to bother him. He just came down in the absolute worst conditions and he looked great. It never seemed to bother him. He was one heck of a skier. He helped all the areas. Us certainly in Taos, in Santa Fe, at La Madera, which is now Sandia Peak in Albuquerque, and others. Twining, the place where Taos Ski Valley is, that my father and Pete looked at the ruins of, which was a mining town, as so many ski area towns are, but the mines had failed in the early 1910s. That brown spots where the wood mill was, it burned in 1942. And across over here is something that really interested my father when he got there, was the shell of the Hondo Lodge. It was not complete. In his years at Santa Fe, he always thought it would have been important to have lodging right on the slope. And being able to finish that hotel, which they did, was of great importance to him. And we didn't live in the lodge. We lived in a trailer this size. There were 5 of us, sometimes 7 on weekends. My father went to the Torres family, who had a huge number of sheep here, and spoke to the old guy, and he said he'd like to buy a burro for my brother, who was then about 5 or 6. Mr. Torres said, certainly, I have some retired burros, it'd be great for kids to ride. They're too old to haul the gear up into the mountains. The shepherds here took their entire herds and their families up into the mountains for those sheep to graze. And when we first got to the ski valley, you could actually see the trails. They leave a trail. But anyway, Gonzalez was quite a character. He liked to run off. He loved to drink beer. He could pick up a beer with his teeth and not break the bottle. They were still glass bottles, and go glug, 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 and then look for more. He lived a long time and is a part of the beginnings of Taos Ski Valley. Now we're starting to look at some pictures of original skiers. I think it's worth naming them. That's my father, that's my mother. This is the famous Dr. Al Rosen of Al's Run. He was instrumental in getting the ski valley going in those early years. He was an avid skier, for sure, taught a lot of local kids to ski. This is Clark Funk, who had the Indian jewelry store in Taos. He's got his concha belt on there. The rust orange, dreadful looking jackets indicate National Ski Patrol. Chilton Anderson was originally hired as a lift mechanic, and you can see in this picture why we hired him. The cable would come off the first lift, and he was tall enough to lift it back on, which neither my father nor I were able to do. And this lady was ski instructor, my teacher, because I had to go to school. The road was so unreliable. I went to school in the valley by mail, and her name is Georgia Houghton. She's still alive. And before we had lifts, we used to tow people up with that orange snowcat up into the woods, and they would ski down there unloading here. A few of them would get brushed off, and I don't know if that's why Dr. Rosen is the very last person in line, but he is. And now we're looking up at the first run that was cut. You see the roof line of the Hondo Lodge, and the only run we had was Snake Dance, which to this day is an absolute expert run. It's interesting that my parents thought that they could run a business, which mainly they wanted to do for their friends, but this trail was obviously too steep for the vast majority of skiers. We're getting into the building of the lift that we brought over from the Tres ski area. It pulled you up on the surface. You stayed on your skis and it pulled you up to the top. And then you had to defy death and ski down Snake Dance. Al's Run was too narrow. Chilton and I and 2 other guys opened all the boxes, unloading that first pummel lift when it came. We piled the stuff from each tower in a separate pile out in the parking lot, and all the parts from number 3, tower 3 were in one spot, and then 4, 5, so on. And then we went home, and the next morning we came and you couldn't see any of the parts because it had snowed more than 3 feet overnight. And so we probed around and eventually found what we thought were all the parts. They were painted bright orange. But as that first winter went on, people kept coming in with bright orange little wheels and guide bars and other pieces of lift. And the thing was, the lift was running, so you're looking at this little piece of lift and saying, gee, I wonder where this goes. That pommel lift went clear to the top of what is still Al's Run and gave us full mountain skiing, including something besides Snake Dance and Inferno, Edelweiss. In the fall of 1957, we built a home, ticket sales, ski school office, general office, rental shop. Here again are my parents, probably in the 60s, based on the booths at the top of the mountain with the other side of the valley in the background. This is my mom in her later years, and my dad, who passed away in 1989 with a heck of a legacy.